Property is an asset class which can make many of us very wealthy. Yet for the most part, those who partake in property, including myself, do so passively. We buy, we hold, and one day we sell. That's the strategy. But there's another, more active strategy that we can and maybe some of us should consider, which involves a little bit more active intervention. Property development. Now, I have a lot more learning to do in this space, so if you want to join me, please subscribe to this channel, but like this video in particular if you want to hear more about this type of topic. Love to hear your experiences as well, your failures in this space of property development or your successes. Please welcome to the conversation, John Kenel.
いただきます。
Hey, welcome everyone to the Everyday Investor Podcast. I'm sitting today with John Kenel. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Darcy. And thanks for inviting me on again.
Hey, no problem.
I don't know if you remember when you invited me.
I was just looking at the text. That's why I was smiling before.
We made it halfway.
Yeah.
We got to Hampton Downs. We stopped at the cafe. It was raining so much. We were driving slower and slower on the motorway. My wife was with me. And we decided just to pull off and see if the rain would settle. And while we were there having lunch, we got a text. The emergency text came out and said, "Stay out of Auckland if you can." So
Isn't it amazing, isn't it? Like back in my day, right? Back in your day as well, no doubt. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any safe notifications. There would have been maybe a tsunami siren that was used to notify the local fire department that there was a car accident that they should attend. Like that was the mass communication devices used back then.
Yeah.
And still used in some places. But yeah, it's amazing how quick we are to notify everybody of dangers, even when there sometimes isn't dangers, which then creates a bigger problem when they're now suspicious that, hey, maybe it's not going to be a bad storm, but it really is.
Yeah. Right. In this case, it was good. I mean, it was bad enough that we decided ourselves to get off the road.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
keeping people out of Auckland was probably a good idea. But we do get them from time to time, don't we? Alerts for different things. And
Yeah.
it does dumb it down a little bit, doesn't it? Or make you a little bit numb to it.
That's
like,
right.
Oh, there's another like level 5 alert.
Yeah, that's right. But it's probably a pretty good segue to talking about the property market, right? Because doesn't even matter if it's property or if it's just regular investments, there's warning signs going off all the time. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's imminent danger, but like in share markets, there's the 2 and 10s inversion of the yield curve, bull steepening yield curve, which I was reading about last night. Super fascinating. With the property market, it's a cyclical beast. Interest rates go up, generally prices go down. When interest rates come down, generally prices go up. So there's a cycle there. And I think I'd like to talk to you about that today. But before we get into that, why don't you give our audience a bit of a background as to what you do and why we are having this conversation.
I am a property investor and a property developer, residential medium density. All right. So I bought my first investment property in 1997. I was living and working in London. I came home to Cambridge. Mum and Dad had always told me I needed to buy property. And I'd saved up a deposit, came back home, got in a car with a real estate agent, drove around, picked one, bought it. That was 1997. I still own it today. So 27 years. And that's pretty much my portfolio overall, right? If I buy a property and it works, then I don't sell it. That's what banks are for. Okay. If you need money, you borrow it. You don't need to sell the property. So I bought another property before I came back home in 2002, came back with my wife. We settled in Cambridge and bought a few more, renovated, added value. So a little bit of not the Burr model, if you may know about. We didn't flip. We just added value and held.
Do you want to break down that Burr model now that you mention it?
But the basics of it are that you buy a property, you renovate it, you get it revalued, and then you sell it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's pretty much that. I'm not sure what the B's and the R's mean.
Yeah.
But
Money printer go Burr as well. So it works really well.
All right.
Okay.
But no, I'm very much buy and sell. I see myself as a farmer. I grew up on a dairy farm, and it's I think very much long term, and it's about building assets. Well, look, if I come back to it, 1997, one of the things that the kind of the driver that made me buy was reading Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think the book had just come out. I read that book, and it really clicked when I read the part about making money work for you, right? Instead of working for money, make money work for you. And then I looked at that and I started doing some calculations. If I bought a property and I paid it off over 25 years, I'd be left with a property. But what if I bought one and I borrowed against it and I bought another, and started doing a couple of calculations and got pretty excited? Well, here we are 25 years later, and those calculations that I did have panned out. They've worked, right?
Better than what you thought.
Better because I've turned it into a business and I've just built on it and built on it and built on it, right? So I have a substantial rental portfolio today, and that passive recurring income gives me the freedom to do as I please. Having that income come in day after day means that I can go away and build something. Right? I'm not constantly concentrating on my income. I don't need to worry, how am I going to pay the bills? So I can go off and I can build a new business, or I could go and travel, or I could just take a break, right? Or I could help my family, or if somebody needs help, I've built a base. I have assets and I have income, and that's something that's really really powerful, right?
At a personal finance level, this happens as well, right? When individual families or couples decide to build wealth, starting at that base layer of personal finance helps them. It's like it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You're taking care of your lower physiological needs, your security, and then you're allowed to work on more meaningful things, right? And so you worked on solving the problem of, I need to make sure my basic needs are met. I don't want to have to worry about when and how much the income is going to be this month, so that you can then do things that are more meaningful, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So when you were buying that first property then and next property and so on, what were you doing for work at the time?
I was in London. I was working for IBM Business Consulting. So I was selling consultancy services into UBS Warburg, the investment bank. So I had been trading in financial markets, and then I'd been away. I was away about a decade overall in Switzerland and the UK. And then we're thinking about moving back home. I'd always wanted to come back to New Zealand. And once I'd found my bride from the UK, right, I'd gone away and found a partner overseas, and I was bringing her home like good Kiwis should do, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's what they're all doing right now, I'm sure.
And I thought, what am I going to do in New Zealand? There's no financial markets really to speak of, and with the time zones, you'd be up all night and so on. And I thought, and that's when sort of IT sales. I thought you can do pretty well in IT sales. I knew a few people doing it, and they were making pretty good money. And it was a kind of a small shift from financial markets and trading to selling to those guys. I understood what they were doing.
Yes.
So
And were any of those skills kind of transferable to when you started doing property transactions? Which ones in particular?
Definitely the sales skills.
Okay.
Probably sales, negotiation,
Yeah.
learning how to. I mean, the type of sales I was doing was very much business to business, consultative sales, right? Trying to work out what is your problem, and where is that problem coming from? Who else is affected by the problem? And then going away and coming up with a solution.
Yeah.
And property is really about finding problems and finding solutions to those problems. Is how you make money. That's what I do now. That's what a developer does, right? A developer adds value by solving problems. So sites that I tend to buy have a problem, some kind of problem. And sometimes I know immediately what the solution to it is. Other times I need to work it out. So an example is I've recently bought 3 sites in Cambridge. Now, it's right in the center of the town. If you've been into Cambridge, there's a white church just as you come into town. Whether you come from Hamilton Road or Victoria Road, you come to a roundabout and there's a white church right there. So you're right in town. The property had been on the market for months. I'd seen it. I've been notified by multiple agents it's for sale. The reason it wasn't selling is the driveway was too narrow to develop it beyond 4 units, and the price of the land was too expensive. It's actually a pretty simple solution. I just bought the neighbors, right? So I widened the driveway, and now I'm going to sell the 2 houses and keep the land that I wanted. And it's going to be, it should be a very lucrative project. I mean, I bought the land for a lot less than market value.
You saw a problem that you had a solution, probably, maybe in that case, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe you actually saw the solution that somebody else employed, or you had used that solution before in the past, maybe, or you were just using your lateral thinking brain, and you saw the solution, and then bam.
Exactly. There's a motel next door. I approached them about getting access over some of their driveway. They were not interested at all. So
why.
it didn't work. Tried a bunch of other things. So
Yeah. Now that's cool. So today you would call yourself a property developer, correct?
And investor. As so,
Which is
even
really interesting because you're kind of talking about two very different strategies, which I find fascinating.
yes and no, And again, in the property development club, I'm teaching people to get into property investment through development. Okay.
Interesting, yeah.
So they actually work really well together. So all of my property development has been focused on property investment, rental properties. So from day one, I built property, purpose built for rent.
That's right.
Okay, and that's a bit different to just building a house for anyone, right? So a lot of people they'll go and build a spec home, and it could be rented out and could be purchased by anybody. Based on the location, I can work out the demographic demand and then build to that. And I've been doing that now for 20 years. I've built about 1,000 units, mostly in Hamilton, and it's worked really, really well.
You had your model, you followed it, possibly didn't even know what the model was until you started doing it over and over again, then you realized you had a model?
Over and over again. Look, I don't know who, there's a quote, but one of the things that many business people are guilty of is trying something, it works really, really well, and then they go and do something over there, right? And you're laughing because
I've done it as well.
You've done it yourself, right?
That's right. Totally.
And it takes someone else often to look at it and go, Darcy, why don't you just do that again? Well, I could, but I know how to do that, right? Where's the fun in that? Well, guess what? After 20 years, some of what I do is a little bit dull now, right? I've done the same thing over and over again, but get your enjoyment somewhere else. You know? I mean, it's not that I don't enjoy what I do. It's why I'm still doing it. I don't need to do it. I could have retired a decade ago easily and, with this passive income. But I love the property industry. I like the people that I deal with. And I like the creative outlet, the design, the building, changing a neighborhood. Generally, I take old rundown houses, past their best before date, right? People shouldn't be living in them. We get rid of them and replace them with warm, healthy homes, So it's a kind of a win-win-win because we're selling off the plans to mum and dad investors, and most of the people who buy from me through Assured are buying their first or second property, and that's it, right? They're not going to buy any more. They buy one or they buy two. They commit to buying by signing a sale and purchase agreement, paying a 10% deposit. I can take that commitment to the bank. The bank will happily fund me to build those houses. So those property investors are actually creating new housing, which is not something you'll hear in the media.
No, that's right.
All right?
Yeah.
Landlords are greedy and evil, and they steal houses from first home buyers.
And property developers are the spawn of Satan himself.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
all right?
Totally.
If you ignore the fact that I've built 1,000 units with the help of mum and dad investors, okay? So tenants have got a much greater choice of warm, healthy homes that they can rent. The families who bought the homes and held on to them are better off, right? They've got more wealth. They're going to be less of a burden on the state. They're going to be able to help other people. And I have a good business. So it's win-win-win.
All right, please pardon the interruption on this one, but as mentioned at the start of the show, there are many strategies that one can take to build new wealth in the new world. The best place to start is by trying to understand what the new world will actually look like. Not the world that you want to see, but the world that you'll likely see. The next step involves the alignment of your revenue model and your wealth model to that reality. In the financial advice space, everyone is trying to sell something, and the options are in fact unlimited as to where you can invest your money. But if you want advice from someone with skin in the game but not a horse in your race, then reach out to me. There's a link to have a free 15-minute conversation in the notes, and you can learn about the coaching sessions that I offer to self-directed DIY investors. Let's get back to the show. To me, it feels like property development is a very high risk reward activity to engage in, whereas buying and holding property feels like a relatively low, more of a passive strategy, I guess, to build wealth. Mm-hmm. And to marry those two things together, I'd never really married them together. In my mind anyway, I was kind of thinking them as either or, but I know a lot of people that I deal with who own property, whether they're already a rental or it's their own home, and they recognize that there is potential to subdivide and create more units of dwellings, recognize that it is a valid path. And so I've been thinking lately just like how much my own paradigm needs to change. If I was to build wealth using other strategies, what would I change? And in the area of property development, I would need to deal with this assumption that I have. And I think it probably comes from my childhood when I saw my parents probably stuffing it up. But I need to deal with that assumption of around is there
Property
really,
development is high risk.
yeah. So,
And it's a roll of the dice. It's 50-50, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna leverage up everything you own and put it on red. Woo!
exactly.
You don't have to be Kenyon Clark.
Okay.
You don't have to buy a Ferrari or Rolls Royce. Okay. You don't have to be a dickhead, basically. You can run a normal business. Until very recently, or nobody would know who I was. Okay. So I've very much played under the radar. I live in Cambridge, small town. You know, I didn't want to pop my head up. You know, tall poppies alive and well in New Zealand. We don't want to see people doing too well. A bunch of things have changed now. Yeah, been married for 24 years. You know, I still have a relationship with my kids. You know, you don't. You know, there's a whole lot of things that come with the word developer, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know,
totally. And those things that you just said aren't the things that I would normally associate with developers that I know.
Yeah, exactly. And that's that's the problem. And those are some of the myths that I want to dispel. I also want to dispel the myth that property development has to be risky. It doesn't have to be risky. Okay, there is risk. Okay, and there's probably more risk than many other things, but there's also much more upside. Okay, and we need developers. We need more housing, and we need especially more affordable housing. And who's going to build it? The governments don't build housing. Okay, councils don't build housing. In fact, the only people who build housing are builders and developers. Right? People build housing. Someone has to run it. Someone has to finance it. Someone has to spend the time and the effort and the energy to herd cats. You know, to make it happen. And that's people. And that's, again, part of the Property Development Club is if I can teach more people how to do developments, if I could teach 5,000 people to build 10 homes each, right, then I've built 25 times more than Kiwi Build, who have built now, out of the 100,000 homes, as of December last year, they'd built 2,229 from the 100,000. Okay. If this were one of the old school tests, you're like fifth form, and you had to write your name on the top, that's basically what they did. They wrote Kiwi Build and they got 2% for writing the name. And how much did they spend in the process? Right? And this isn't about one party or the other. In my experience in 20 years of doing this, no government or council have ever made housing more affordable. They've only layered on cost. I sold my first lot of townhouses on Gadsby Place by Waikato University, 3-bed, 2-bath for 275,000. The last 2 bedrooms I sold on Kalani Road was 689,000. The difference between them, one's got a little bit more insulation and double glazing. The rest, cost.
And where does that cost come from?
Regulation, fees, consulting reports, just stuff.
And that's stuff that basically comes from bigger government. And so there is this, I guess,
and the massive industry around housing, the consulting industry, this whole thing that feeds off it.
Okay. So I wanted to ask this question later on, but I can't hold back. Is property development or even property investment, is it an ethical investment?
100% it's ethical. It's
So-
not just ethical, it's essential that we invest in housing.
Okay. What would you say then to, say, the couple who has more than enough ability to leverage up a little bit of debt and to either buy and hold something or to do a development of some sort? What would you say to them if they said, but no, that's taking away the opportunity of someone else to own their own home? I know it doesn't sound logical, but this is how a lot of people do think. Sorry, I shouldn't put that down as illogical people, but there is a certain mindset, a certain way of thinking that has seeped into a certain type of people, which I feel, stops them from solving other people's problems really efficiently.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
also it stops them from getting wealthy,
I
right?
had a comment like this on one of my social media feeds today. Exactly that.
Right.
You know, you're the problem. You just want more of this. What they can't seem to understand is what I want to do is build more housing, because I believe that the only thing that's going to make it more possible for young people to get into a home is if we have more homes. Put it this way: if I don't know, let's say the aliens, okay, friendly aliens, they decided we needed 1 million more homes, and tonight they just appeared, right? And they're all plumbed in, and they had driveways, and they were ready to move in tomorrow morning. Would house prices be higher or lower?
Yeah. Right.
Pretty simple, really. And yeah, there's a whole lot of other things that you can say around that. But at the end of the day, if we had 1 million more homes, we wouldn't be talking about housing affordability. So
And I think, like, I understand it though, to be fair on people who do have the view that housing is an unethical investment class. I understand it because I understand that they're probably looking at that, that pyramid structure of hierarchy of needs. They would look at someone like yourself. Hey, you have plenty of passive income. You have more than enough wealth. Why are you still building when you have enough? Surely you have enough. You must be greedy. But what they don't realize is that you've moved further up that pyramid, and now you're working on things like meaning, right? And I've seen this with a lot of people
things that
lately.
I want to do,
Yeah, things that you want to do, not things that you
I've got
have
a
to do.
reason to be doing it.
So what is your reason to be a
I
property
mean,
developer?
I took quite a lot of time off after COVID, right? I had 10 projects under construction when COVID hit. And I had to sit at home and watch on cameras as people were taking fridges out of our apartments and taking TVs, and we had to stay home. Didn't mean the criminals had to stay home, right? They were out and about doing as they pleased. That lockdown ended up costing me, I worked out, about 75,000 a week, right? Oh, here's some wage subsidies. Wage subsidy for a developer. That's a drop in the bucket, right? When you've got, I don't know, pick a number, tens of millions in debt, because it's all in the construction. These are houses where these 10 developments were under construction, right? So that money's out there. But anyway, I took some time off, and I ran a marathon for the first time. I ran the Auckland Marathon, so heaps of training for that. I learned to play golf. Still not very good at it.
Yeah.
Read a lot of books, spent time at the beach, family, friends. It was fantastic. And I've still got energy. I've got another round at something. It's taken me 20 years to build Assured to where it is, and it's ticking along, and that's doing great. But I want to do something. I want to do something meaningful and something that makes a difference and moves the needle.
And so the needle that you're trying to move is what?
Is more housing.
Simple.
Is more housing, and I can do that by teaching people how to do it. Because if we come back to the risk around property development, I think a big part of the risk is that people don't know how to do it.
And they're learning on the job, right?
They're learning on the job, and now, like, I have 250 people in the club now, so I've talked to a lot of different people, and funnily enough, quite a number of them are in and around property. Builders, surveyors, architects, electricians, as well as people from other industries. But people have been around it but never done their own development because they don't know how to do it. It's risky, right? So what I want to do is giving people as a structure, is a process. I can teach people what I've done. There must be 1,000 different ways to develop a property, but as I know one way that works, and that's what I'm teaching people to do. And that should reduce their risk. If they follow the steps, I've got 17 steps, I've got 40 interactive videos, and I've got a process. We have a weekly call for about an hour. People can come on, ask questions, they can bring deals. One of the things that's tough about development is it can be quite a lonely game, right? And I've heard this again from people coming in. They're doing a development. Maybe they've bought a site. They're going to renovate the front house and do a duplex on the back, and they hit a snag. And where do they go?
So here you have people in the room that have probably seen it before. They're bouncing ideas off each other and sharing knowledge, just because it's easy. It doesn't cost them anything to have a conversation, but you're putting them in the room together. So the Property Development Club,
Yes.
is what it's called.
Yes.
And people can find it where?
thepropertydevelopmentclub.com is the website. We're on Facebook and LinkedIn
Awesome.
and
And YouTube
all
as
over the
well.
place.
Yeah.
YouTube, and just Google the Property
Yeah,
Development Club.
I'll put a link in the notes, and the reason I guess why I wanted you to bring this up is because again, like when I'm talking to people and they're thinking about their moves and the potential that they have with their property, often what does stop them from moving forward is the risk piece. And if we can de-risk it through education and through like a social network of sorts,
Yep.
then they're more likely to get the return without the degree of risk that they otherwise would have engaged in, which means that they're more likely to mine their own opportunities rather than just take what everybody else has to take.
Right.
Which I think is cool.
Yep.
Not everyone should do property development, would be my belief. But a lot more people probably can do it, including myself, to be honest. And I've never really thought about it, but again,
Okay.
I'm trying to challenge myself. Again, the reason why I haven't is because I've seen family lose, again, for the reasons that we've alluded
Well, it's
to.
really important where you start, and I think people struggle with that. So a lot of people, they'll talk to a builder, or they'll talk to an architect. An architect will happily start drawing plans for them, right? They'll talk to council.
Yeah.
Where you need to start is with a town planner. So let's take a step back. Before you even talk to a planner, you want to think about, what do you want to develop? Okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to build a commercial building? Do you want to do a strip of retail shops? Do you want to build a couple of houses? So I teach people to start with a couple of townhouses, right? Start with 4 or 6 townhouses, say. So keep it manageable. So now you've got some kind of a vision or a goal, okay? So you've got a starting point already.
Yeah.
So then you can go to a planner and say, I'd like to build 4 or 6 townhouses. Where can I do it? And then they can show you the planning maps and go, well, these streets won't do. Don't go anywhere around here. But all of these places, all of these streets, you should be able to build townhouses in there, right? Sure. So now you've got a starting point. So you can go and look for sites for sale, talk to agents in the area, and then you'll identify properties. Then you can take those properties to a planner, right? Set back to the same planner and go, would this do it? And then you'll start, and there's a whole process from there. But if you can at least start like that as a first step,
Sure.
It'll save you a whole lot of trouble. Because the alternatives are, you start talking about plans, right? And I've seen people have advanced plans drawn up, and then they find somewhere down the line they can't even build those on the site.
Same
They
thing,
might have
yeah.
paid too much for the land.
Yeah.
Because they thought they could put 6 townhouses on it, and now they find out they can only do 3.
It's the same old thing that you see with everything. You start with what you want to build in your mind first before you then go out and you start initiating some of these steps. But if you start working on the steps first before you think about where you're going, of course you're going to trip up. So, okay.
Exactly.
So planner, watch list, you find a property, check back in with the planner. Yep. Looks like this could work.
Yes.
What would be some of the next most likely steps that people would have to take in terms of the next step of due diligence?
Quite quickly then, I like to actually get the land under contract.
Okay.
Because there's no point spending a lot of time and money and effort and finding out, wow, looks like a great opportunity, and you go back to the agent and the property's sold. Get it under contract. And this is where I always have a little bit of I'm never comfortable with the way we do property, how we buy and sell. Our system is actually really, really good compared to the UK, where I have bought houses in the UK, but boy, it's a mission because they keep falling over.
Right.
Whereas here, at least if you secure it, you've got it.
Not going to be gazumped, yeah.
But what I don't like is that as a developer, you need to agree to a purchase price before you actually know for sure what you can build. So that's always a bit of a...
But that's also another way of saying risk, right?
Yeah.
Uncertain outcome.
Yep.
So right when there's some uncertainty that the dollars will actually add up, you are taking your first big step of risk, right? Where you're stepping into the unknown because you have to make sure that the price that you pay allows enough.
At this
margin.
point, though, you're only conditional, right? So you haven't actually taken the risk yet, right? All you've done is secure the property, and you want to secure it for as long as you can, okay? Easy to do in a slow market, not easy in a fast market. You know, there are times when I've bought sites unconditionally, right? I've had a call from an agent, I pull over the car, do some numbers on the back of an envelope, and I buy it. But I can do that because I built a block of townhouses next door and across the road and around the corner. So I know the area, and that's one of the things I also teach is to focus on your niche. So not just on what you're building, for example, townhouses, but where you're doing it. Okay. There's a reason that almost everything I've developed is walking distance from the hospital, uni, and CBD, because I know that area, right?
It's like designing a kitchen, right? There has to be that triangle between the fridge, the sink, and the oven, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
you've got this triangulated sort of sweet spot where as long as those ingredients tick the box, that's your niche. Okay. So take me then to the next step. Let's say everything checks
Okay.
out. You go unconditional. What happens next?
Well, so before unconditional, before you go unconditional, you want to actually know how much money you're going to make. Right. So a lot of people, again, they'll go ahead and a lot of things are open. You want to de-risk as much as possible before you go unconditional. You want to work out as much as you possibly can. So that includes, talking to a planner, a surveyor, looking at three waters. And when I say three waters, I mean water, storm, water, sewer, not some political structure. All right. Yeah. A bulk and location and a feasibility.
Okay.
Right. You want to put some numbers in a sheet, get those costs as accurate as you possibly can to try and work out what your gross
actual
profit
is.
should be.
Okay, so you would go through this process because you want to figure out how much money you're going to make for the capital that you're deploying. It needs to be at a certain ratio to turn on the lenders, but
Correct.
also to really justify the uncertainty that you are engaging with, because you are still engaging with some uncertainty, because presumably there's like a diminishing return to every extra hour that you put into research here, right? Unless you are, because experience will pay dividends in the long run, but when you're just starting, there's going to be that risk or that possibility you're going to overlook something simple, right?
And where the risk really comes in is with council and regulation. So the biggest risk to your business as a property developer in New Zealand is the council.
Right.
Okay, and they can change rules from one day to the next. And I have it with another site. It was a 22-unit site when I bought it. We did all the due diligence. I've been fighting now for 4 years. Have an RMA barrister on it now for some time. I've probably spent close to $500,000 on fees and inspections and all the rest of it. And I'm going to have to walk away. I'm not going to be able to develop it at all. They've just kept on raising these theoretical flood levels. 2 years ago, we had that 100-year storm. The little stream went from, I don't know, let's say about 200 to 300.
Right.
Yet the model says the whole valley will fill up. So we're talking a Noah's Ark type event. Right?
Wow.
I can't develop the site, and there's nothing I can do about it. So that's why I say council is your number one risk, and you can't work that out in a feasibility. A planner can't tell you.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest risk.
So, like we'll skip the rest of like how does the process work, but I want to cover off some of the things that have changed specifically over the last, say, 5 to 7 years in this space, because from what I've understood, it feels like the amount of regulation seems to be following an exponential curve, and I wonder where it goes. So if you could maybe take me through some of the things that have changed that have made it a little bit more challenging or uncertain as a property developer, and how that directly feeds into price as well.
Sure. I jotted down a few notes before this podcast, right? Like to sort of have a think about what I want to talk about. And I looked at some of the government interventions in the last 5 years alone, and I quickly came up with 13 major interventions.
You struggled to find anything, right?
Let me just
I've just happened to prepare this sheet here.
Let's just read off a couple of these, all right? Yeah. Bright line test, interest deductibility, build to rent, Kiwi build, first home loan grants, foreign buyer ban, urban development legislation, Residential Tenancies Act, Healthy Homes Standard, RMA, one document into 3 complicated documents. Somehow taking one complicated document and converting it into 3 complicated documents with different focus in each was going to make things easier. Housing Acceleration Fund, ring fencing rules, progressive home ownership. This is why, for years, it felt like they were coming up with something new every day. Like the industry shell-shocked. It's just like, what is going on? What are we supposed to be doing? What can we do? What can't we do? I mean, it's just all of these things were coming at once, and some of them were to help first home buyers, and some were to try and make housing more affordable, and some were just straight anti-landlord legislation because property investors are the problem, right? If we had no property investors, everybody would own a home. No, they wouldn't. Property investors are a very important part of the market. If we just change the words slightly and call them long-term rental accommodation providers.
I love that phrase. I think Andrew Crosby was the first one who introduced me to that concept.
Okay.
It's a great, right? Like
Yeah.
you are a service provider.
Correct.
That is your
Long-term rental accommodation provider, no different to a social housing provider. The ownership is different.
correct.
It's owned by a private individual or company. For the person who's moved out of a motel with their children into a house, does it make any difference to them? And it shouldn't make any difference to the public. It shouldn't make any difference to anyone else. We need all the houses we can get, regardless of where the funding comes from.
So really, this is an issue of idealistic principles around what's best, private ownership or public ownership. And maybe that was more true with the previous government than the present one. I would say over a long enough time frame, they all believe the same thing because government has to get bigger over time in their world. And so it means basically that everything has to be public ownership over the long term, would be my cynical take on things. But perhaps 5 years ago, we just saw a very distinct wave of that crash all at one time. Would that be fair?
Well, and it's caused huge harm, right? A huge amount of harm. Building costs are up 30 to 35% since 2020 alone.
And how much of that is because of just the rising cost of actual materials versus the other stuff, which effectively is legislation?
Well, some of it is materials, and some of that is actually government too, because it's inflation, right?
Sure,
I
of
don't
course.
need to teach you about that.
Yeah.
right?
Well, hey, that's another episode.
They
right
just
there.
keep on creating more money.
Yeah.
And, that money is competing for the same number of goods or services. Or in the case of COVID, when you're locked down, that more money is competing for less goods and services. What's going to happen to the price, guys?
Must come down, surely, because it's more fair.
So inflation, definitely. Supply chain disruptions, both nationally and internationally, have caused issues. Staffing shortages, skills shortages, right? And at the moment, this is one thing I'm really concerned about, is not right now. It's in a couple of years' time when the market picks up and we need people to build the houses, when the stars align again, because it's a cycle, right?
Yep.
Like you said, we're not going to have the people to build the houses. I don't know how many, I've lost track of how many people I know are members of their team moved to Australia. And many of those people aren't going to come back, and these are people who've they've done a trade, they've got experience, and they've had enough. And often they didn't really have any choice, right? The business has been downscaling. So many people in construction are suffering right now.
So the workforce has been depleted. The private means of production is severely throttled, so that when the cycle picks up again, there might be issues with new supply coming online, which means prices will go up a lot faster because of the supply and demand imbalance, right?
And there's a big issue from the economic perspective. So people often will comment again online and say, you shouldn't be investing in housing. It's not productive. Put it into productive assets, right?
Yes.
I disagree. Of course I disagree. I'm in property, but I also look at the stats, property is 15% of New Zealand's GDP. Construction is between 6 and 7% of our GDP. Look at globally, construction is 13% of global GDP, right? So that's more than a tenth of everything like created in the world is construction. And not only that, in New Zealand, residential construction employs 10% of the population, 235,000 people. Okay, it's just such a big impact. Australia, the Reserve Bank carried out a report on a study into residential construction, and the outcome was that for every dollar spent on residential construction, GDP increased by $1.30.
Wow.
So construction has a multiplier effect because it affects other industries, transport, retail, manufacturing. There's all these flow-on effects of construction. And it's important enough, like housing is important enough from an economic perspective, but we haven't even talked about the fact that people live in them. We're not building more fridges, right? These are homes. This is where people live. We still have families living in motels, children growing up in incredibly unsuitable environments. thousands of horrible, broken down, damp homes. I go through them often, right? These are the properties I buy and get rid of. There are a lot of horrible homes in New Zealand, like really horrible homes. And it's investors' fault. It's how, we need healthy homes and whatever. No, it's more than that. A lot of these homes are just, they're no good anymore, right? They were built to last for 40 or 50, maybe 60 years tops. They've got to go. We need to be building more housing. And unfortunately, no government or council has ever done anything to make housing cheaper or easier to build.
There's no incentive to, because the only incentive lies in getting the public on side with any effort that exists to increase and justify larger government, right? So it'll be the Marxist taglines. It'll be, let's go after those with capital to bring them down, because really it should be the state that does this.
Yeah.
Because we need to get wealthier as a country, and that means the government gets wealthier. There's all these real subtle twists on common sense logic that get used to effectively get the public offside with private capital and onside with public capital.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I scratch my head all the time around this. It's probably why I got a bit of a bald spot, right? I just can't figure out what the answer is here. But
well, we know what the answer isn't. You only have to look over COVID. The government spent more money than ever, right? Is it any tangible benefit from any of that spending?
You mentioned the multiple effect, right? So that just means that when there's $1 spent, there's more than $1 of something that appears as a result.
Mm-hmm.
With government spending, it's a divisible effect, really, isn't it? It's like there's less productivity. So what does that mean? It means that they create inflation. By their very existence, they don't add any value, but they consume resource.
Yep.
Like, I'm not saying that I'm anti-government or anything here, but I would say that, hey, there's probably a sweet spot, and the smaller you are as a country, it's probably a bit smaller than what you'd like to think, but there's a sweet spot in terms of how much government intervention we have in our lives, and I think we've well and truly passed that sweet spot.
We have a lot. We have a lot. I remember coming back to New Zealand in 2002 and feeling like free after living in Switzerland and the UK, and like, wow, you can just do what you want, right? And you can start a business, you can buy property, and you can borrow money, and you can do things, and you could just do it.
Yeah.
Not today. Oh my gosh, the last 20 years. I mean, the amount of time I spend each month on AML.
So anti-money laundering legislation, know your customer stuff. So you as a developer or as a borrower?
Well, because I have multiple entities, right?
Sure.
So the banks, it's much easier for a bank if you say, number 1 Smith Street, we're building 10 townhouses. It's a new company, right? There are no fish hooks. There's no history. Here's the development. Can you fund it? Yep, cool. We'll fund number 1 Smith Street through number 1 Smith Street Limited. At the end of the project, you pay the money back, you wind it up, right?
Yeah.
We're still here. I'm still here. I have an office in Cambridge. If there's any issues with the property, we're still bound for 10 years under the Building Act.
Yeah.
And we're there, right?
Yeah.
You can come and see us.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not a case of winding it up to hide, because you can't do that. You can't. But because we have multiple entities, with all the entities those entities deal with, the real estate agents and the banks and all these other people, they all have these. We have to update the AML often every 3 months.
Sure.
So this is a huge ongoing task
Yes.
for me, for the other company. I guess all of this goes somewhere to government, and then there's a lot of people employed.
Well, it stops terrorism, though, John. It stops terrorism. So
it stops dodgy developers from taking a whole lot of money from the public and losing it. Oh, no.
That sounds really familiar. Actually, that was my next question. So I love that segue, though, John. You've done this before. Let's delve into that, though, because there's ways that you can participate with the benefit of mining land. That's how I think of development, right? You're mining land. You're doing stuff to it to create more units of dwelling. You're putting money into it. You're getting more money out. It's a form of investment or wealth creation. You can participate in that directly if you own your own home and you just hold it, benefit from inflation. You could buy rentals, stack them up, leverage up to the balls, whatever. But when you come to development, it's a bit more risk and returny. But you could also then just take that money and invest with a company who does that. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. Recently, we had Duval in New Zealand be placed under statutory management, which is a different way of winding things up, which is a little bit more top down, to say the least.
Direct government control, right?
Direct government control.
Or intervention.
They've moved in and they've decided that doesn't matter if you're a creditor and where you rank in the scheme of things, we're going to appoint PwC in this case to jump in there and allocate the leftovers as we see fit. Which I thought was an interesting dynamic. Like I understand that that's a possibility, but it kind of feels a little bit overreachy. But maybe there's a reason why, and so maybe it's because they're a massive developer. Maybe they're the biggest developer, and maybe they're of systemic importance. So where do they say you're a property developer? How big was Duval or is Duval?
Not very big.
Really?
No.
Like what, number 2 or 3? Or?
No. I don't think they were even in top 10 or 20. They weren't very big at all.
The other thing, of course, is that, hey, this is, unfortunately, it is cyclical, the industry. There are things that go bust every now and then. Let's cut to the chase, though. Like, what is your opinion on this Duval story? Why do you think the FMA kind of triggered this? Where do you think this goes?
I'm incredibly frustrated by the whole thing, right? I'm appalled, probably a better word. We all saw it coming. If you're in the property industry, you saw him blow up last time, 2008, lost about 90 million, most of it to Royal Bank of Scotland, plus all the tradespeople who didn't get paid. For anyone who asked me over the last 10 years, and I've been approached by many people, hey, we're looking at Duval, they're paying 10% return, whatever. I said, don't touch it, right? Just don't go anywhere near it, because I believe he will blow up again. And I believe that if he gets half the chance, he will do it again now. We could be here in 10 years' time talking about exactly the same thing if he has a chance to do it. So it's just incredibly frustrating. Like, how, when I have to spend so much time and so many people around the country are doing so much paperwork all the time, proving all these things and making sure we're not doing anything dodgy, yet someone can go out there and mislead the public to the tune of $250 million, and that's okay. Oh well. Gosh, who would have known?
There was no warning sign.
There's no warning sign. No warnings at all. And what's really personally really annoying is that I'm a property developer, right? So now I'm in the same boat as he is. I'm like him. That's going to rub off on me. I don't take people's money, right? I've done a couple of JVs years ago with some friends, and they've been on at me for ages. Hey, John, can we invest in your developments? And I did a couple, and that was it. I borrow money from banks, generally from ANZ, and that's it. I don't get into borrowing money from people. I don't need to. I don't want to. But yeah, it's just, you've got the people who invested their savings. You've also got a lot of tradespeople, a lot of small businesses, people with, it's mum and dad and it's 2 staff, and they're installing kitchens, right? And these guys aren't on big money. And then they're, maybe this month they're not paid, and it's $6,000, and they're like, oh, and there's a story, and then next month there's another 12,000, and you go, well, why don't they stop? Well, at this point now they're owed 18,000. Do they stop? When you say, hey, we've got some more units, can you come and do them? You're like, no, go away. Well, yeah, what's going to happen to my 18,000? This went on for months and months and months. So some people had borrowed against their homes to buy the stock to install in Duval properties, and they're not getting paid, right? It's just not right. It's just not right.
What do you think needs to happen to reduce the likelihood that this sort of thing could happen again? Do you think that prohibiting developers from creating any sort of financial product or offering off the back of that's a no-brainer?
Regulation won't stop it. Regulation does not stop this stuff happening. Did it stop? Who was the Ponzi scheme guy, the super famous guy in the US?
Which one? Oh, Madoff.
Madoff.
Yeah.
Did it stop Madoff? They've got all kinds of, the US has got regulations up the wazoo, Regulation doesn't stop bad things happening.
Yeah.
Does it? It just doesn't.
It just makes it harder for the people that aren't doing bad things, is effectively what we're saying. Right?
Exactly.
So the efficient market hypothesis is something that I think can apply to a lot of areas. So all available information has been factored into the price that the market is willing to pay for something, right? Mm-hmm. So I think of a property that has the ability to put 4 extra dwellings on there, and X amount of profit at the end of it. Surely it's just an engineering problem to be able to extract all of the potential bits of information that need to be extracted to be able to figure this all out, right? So
Correct.
surely the market, if it was efficient, would accurately price properties with potential as if that potential had already been achieved. But that's not necessarily true, is it?
To some extent, yes.
Okay.
If it's a flat level site in a medium density zone,
If it's
and
really obvious, it's true. But if it's less obvious, like the driveway, for example, and not being able to solve that just by looking at it within the confines of the opportunity, right?
correct.
Got it. And so that's where I guess really there is opportunity with property development, no matter what, is when you're looking at things that do have quote unquote problems, right?
Well, we probably need to define property development,
Sure.
because property development is, for a lot of people, it's removing that old house and putting some townhouses on, right?
Sure.
Property development is, and this is like, I give this advice to some people who've contacted me, about the club, and they're like, well, I don't have the money. I don't have $1 million, right? So this doesn't help me. Well, you don't need $1 million. If you want to put a little bit of time and energy, effort, maybe, and a little bit of money, there's no reason why you can't become an expert in your area, in Massey, right? And keep an eye on all the land, be in touch with the agents, do your due diligence. And then when sites come up, if you find a site and you take it to a planner, and you could get that site under contract and you can offer it to a developer, right? Because that's got value now.
You've it's proof of work. You've put the effort in. You then give it to someone like yourself, for example.
And I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, cool. Okay. That's, can I pay your finder's fee? Right.
Is that one of the business models off the back of the property development club that you're kind of hoping would come to fruition?
No.
No. But it'd be quite a nice side effect, though, wouldn't it? If people just
Absolutely.
presented
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. But I'm not in that doing lots of developments mode, but it's something that could come back into the club.
Sure.
Definitely, right? And that's
Yeah, I get
something
it.
that we want to do with the community. So we already have a live community, and people ask questions and talk with each other and so on. And we're having the first meetup in Cambridge on Thursday night.
Cool.
So which is cool, making it from virtual to
Yeah.
real.
That's cool.
But a lot of that is feeding back information. So yes, so finding sites. The thing I'd thought more about was, once we've got like 5,000 people involved in development, and I won't say just developers, because not everyone's developing yet, but across the country, imagine the information that feeds in. Because the only time you really know what you can do with a site is when you've submitted a consent. Before that, you don't know. Even a pre-app meeting with council is non-binding, right? That's what happened with that site that I said I can't develop now. They were concerned about planting some trees on the hill,
Right.
and I ended up spending 21 nights listening for bats and having looking at certain plants, and the list just goes on and on and on. But so all that information feeding back into the club, that's really cool, right? Because only once you submit a consent that you get a formal response, right?
Yeah.
And it's only once you get a decision on a consent that aha. So if you bring another site next door, and it's within a reasonable time frame, you'll get the same answer.
Got it.
But if we can start feeding that kind of information back into the club, and what's going on in different councils and what's being allowed and what's not, that'll be very valuable
I get it.
for the
Because
community.
right now, all that information is siloed, and it's not actually
Well, in
being
one
created.
developer's head, right?
Exactly.
Because 99% of developers in New Zealand would not do any of the things that I'm doing. And this was me up until 5 months ago. I kept everything to myself, because how did I find out the information in the first place? By spending a lot of money and time and sleepless nights, right? It's the only way you learn it is by doing it, and by losing money and making mistakes. And it's hard work.
Yeah.
Property development is hard work. And I'm not saying there are not lots of other hard jobs, but bricklayers, that's hard work, man. There are a lot of hard jobs, but property development is it is tough. But a lot of it is the uncertainty, right? So you try and de-risk as much as you can, and try and work out as much as you can, but there's still that uncertainty.
That's what I like about, I guess, the present age that we're dealing with, right? Is that we're in a world where we can share this knowledge using things like podcasts and internet.
Yep.
We can do that now, whereas we couldn't before. And so it's kind of flipped the whole thing on its head, where before we wanted to hang on to our IP. Now we want to give it away, which is actually really cool, right?
That is
Because
cool.
we're doing
That is
something
cool.
good. We are
Yep,
literally
absolutely.
building wealth in other people's lives when we give away our secret sauce.
Uh-huh.
And funnily enough, we feel more fulfilled, we feel happier, and we actually get paid in the process. It's mysterious, right?
Well, I'm hoping that's coming, but
Yeah, it will. It will, right? Like it always does. You give and you shall receive, John. It works, trust me.
yeah, I
sure you've seen
I
that.
believe I believe 100%. I saw it actually in sales as well. You know, if you're putting in the effort and you're going out and you're meeting customers and you're getting to know people and you're working out their problems and you're bringing solutions and potential solutions and you're just putting all this energy and effort in, something has to come back.
It does.
Right?
Yeah,
It just it just has to come back.
Absolutely. I've seen that with real estate agents, especially, right? Like working alongside real estate agents, you learn a lot
Right.
about human behavior, how to build a business, how not to build a business, and how to give before you receive. And that's kind of what I was alluding to is
Yeah.
if you help solve other people's problems at some stage, problems get solved for you and you get given stuff.
It reminds me
cool.
of a Zig Ziglar quote. So you can get anything in life that you want as long as you help enough other people get what they want.
That's cool, isn't it?
So that's basically exactly what you're talking about, isn't it? It's if you help enough people, then
Yeah, it comes back to you. So let's finish up on a few positive things that the government has done, which I can't even say that without laughing. But in this area of property development, I don't want to kind of make it sound like we don't like the government, or we, even though sometimes it's kind of true. But what would you say in terms of the property space? Like, what are some of the good things that we've seen in terms of initiatives or legislation or rules or whatever?
they are saying the right things. I think they are consulting with industry.
Right.
They seem to be bringing a practical kind of real world approach to their ideas. So not like sometimes in the past where I hear this talking head and I'm just like, where did you get these ideas from, right?
Yeah.
This is just not going to work, or this is going to drive up house prices or drive up rents, all of which has happened. They're saying the right things. And so I want to believe that we'll see change. It's so dope. I mean, some of the things they've done, they've brought in, or they are bringing in the ability to build a minor dwelling up to 60 square meters without consent. Okay. They are bringing in remote inspections potentially, right? Which will, somewhere like Auckland, imagine the time saved for a building inspector. And that leads on to the third one, which is minor variations. So I just had this, I'm just renovating my batch in Pauanui, and there was an issue with the size of a beam. So we had to get the beam redesigned and manufactured. That was I can't remember, it was a major or minor consent amendment. But the point was, as long as that amendment was processing, we couldn't get any inspections. So everything stops. So the whole development stops, right? So they're changing the rules around minor variations that you can have them inspected. They still have to meet the building code and all the standards and so on, but you can basically sum them up at the end.
Yes.
And put in one consent to be
Okay.
processed. Very practical, very logical, save a huge amount of time and effort.
And
right?
this is most likely come from consultations with people within the industry, funnily enough,
Yep.
rather than Das Kapital. They're actually talking to the people.
Correct.
Right? That's cool.
Correct. So the things they're saying are good. Now, and also I've seen it with some of the pressure they've put on councils around density rules. So some of the councils, you can now build closer to the boundaries, increased height to boundaries, so which makes a big difference. You can build a more bulky building, right?
Okay.
So you can get more onto the site, and yeah, just a lot of in medium density zones, sensible things that enable you to get more value out of the land. Okay. The problem is with all of these things is councils, until they get control of councils, nothing they do will have the desired effect. Until you have consent from council, you can't put in a toilet or a sink or anything else. You see? So it's a little bit, it's not really a dwelling, it's a 60 square meter outside room.
Right.
Hopefully they can find a way to get it through, but I can't see it because you won't be able to hook a toilet into the council system without a council consent. And that's where then we're back to square one. So they've come up with a way to push back.
Got it. I see. So
And
there's all this power and control issues going on with local government, centralized government. Centralized government gets all the money, local government gets all the costs.
That's exactly it. Councils hate development.
Yeah.
Right. It's
And
more
it's no
people, it's
wonder
more
why.
cars, they need
Right.
more schools, they need all the rest of it. And so the funding model's broken, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
probably another discussion. But somewhere like Switzerland has a different funding model where the state gets a share of your income tax. Now, wouldn't that be amazing? Can you imagine if, like in the Waikato,
Like the council, you mean? Council getting a share of your income tax?
effectively, so a council ends up getting a share of it? Yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So the councils actually compete with one another to attract more people to the area. Okay.
Yeah.
So somewhere like Hamilton, which is growing, which is an attractive city for many reasons, close to the beaches, good schools, you can still housing affordability. There's a whole lot of reasons why people want to live in and around Hamilton. That city should be getting a lot of funding, right? Because we've got a ton of new houses going in and we need new schools and we need all the rest of it. But it's not getting the funding that it needs. So something has to flip with our funding model.
Yeah. All right. Let's finish up, though, around just some general commentary on where we're at from a bigger macro picture right now, because as alluded to already in this conversation, things are cyclical. Everything is cyclical. And with property development, real estate in general, it goes up, it goes down. And we're in a situation right now where the property market, certainly from where I sit, and I'm dealing a lot with people who are, I guess you'd call them the upgraders.
Okay.
Those are the people that maybe they've already got their first home. They're looking to either buy a rental or sell and buy a much bigger one or do a renovation.
Okay.
So they're kind of in the thick of taking the next level, right? And for those people, especially if there's any sort of job insecurity, especially if they're aware of current global events, interest rates, and the impact on things like that, they are the ones that sit on their hands the longest. But then when they get off their hands, they take quite bold action,
Okay.
which is what I saw following the global financial crisis. So from 2009 to 2012, it felt really similar to this. But then it was the people that seemed to be the people I attracted, I guess, those were the ones that just went ballistic. And they took bold steps, buying big property, buying rentals, not selling their first home, buying another one. And that's kind of what I can see happening again here. But I don't know if we're there yet. Personally, I feel like we need to see interest rates drop a little bit further before it's properly there.
Yep.
But the sentiment has surely shifted. And I want to know from your perspective, because you're talking to real estate agents all the time, you're talking to people who are in the thick of
In the
making,
market,
in
absolutely.
the market, right? Like they're thinking of actually putting power to the road.
I'm in the market. I'm buying property. I have property for sale, right? And one thing I learned when I was trading derivatives, you could do all the analysis you want. You could look at the charts. You didn't actually know what the market was doing until you put a trade on. Whether you're buying, going long or short, you only really know what the market is doing once you're in the market. Okay, I mean by that I mean bring it back to housing. Put a house on the market for sale. You very quickly find out how quickly the market's moving, right? If you don't get any bites, it's quiet. If there are multi offers, you know it's away. Where we're at the moment, and certainly the feedback I'm getting, a young guy I work with, a young guy is in early 30s in Tauranga, for example, he's been watching the market now for some time, and there's a couple of houses he was quite interested in buying his first home with his partner, and he'd been waiting for them to drop. He's like, oh, come on, just drop a little bit further. And recently he said those properties that he'd been watching are gone, right? Okay. So they've gone. Others that he was a bit less interested in, a lot more people at open homes. There's a lot more activity. Things are starting to move. I'm hearing the same from real estate agents. I'm seeing the same myself with property. Not so much on the development side. The developers are coming back, but it's still quite early. I mean, I've just recently bought a couple of development sites. I'm still looking for development sites, but then I'm very much a contrarian type investor. So I like to buy when others are fearful, right? And sell when others are greedy. So I sold a lot of property in 21, even sites that I had intended developing. But once I saw it start to move, I sold out. So I have I'm like very low debt at the moment, some of the lowest I've ever had. So I'm in buying mode, but I'm not in any kind of rush because I agree with you. I think the rates need to actually come down before people will buy. Because for a lot of people, I mean, you know this better than me, New Zealanders tend to buy houses. The way they buy a house is they go to a mortgage broker and say, how much can I borrow? And the broker says, you can borrow 500,000. So they look at their balance. I've got 50 grand. Okay, I can buy something for 550. So and then they've got to service that, right? So until the rates actually drop and that money's coming into their account, they're not going to be buying. They can't afford to buy. Demand hasn't changed. I think there must be huge pent-up demand out there for first-home buyers, for people moving up. They're sitting and waiting, and this is another problem. We have 30,000 houses on the market today. Okay, the average during kind of the spring summertime when things are moving quickly is maybe 20-25, and then winter's often slow, 25 to 30. So we're at the upper end of that range. So there are a lot of listings on the market. But we haven't seen like heaps of new listings come on, really. We haven't had this spring rush. So I think a lot of vendors now, think about it. If you were selling at the moment, all you're hearing is, well, interest rates are coming down. Prices could be going up. So do I want to sell now or do I wait a little bit? So I think we're going to have this waiting game for a little bit longer.
But flush out of the existing stock, perhaps.
Correct.
And then as supply squeeze.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I think is going to happen is that these 30,000 will get chipped away at, right? So we'll get chipped away towards the end of the year. We'll probably get another rate drop on the 9th of October, another one in November, hopefully a decent sized one in February, and we could start churning through that stock. We're at a 5-year low in building consents. So there's not a whole lot of new stock coming on. People look around and go, well, rents are quite soft at the moment. Well, a lot of that is accidental landlords. Right. You've got 20 units you need to sell. Well, you can't just sit on them. You need to pay the interest. You rent them out. So I think once those properties start selling, a lot of those properties that have new ones that have been tenanted won't be re-tenanted. So pressure will go on rents a little bit, and that'll help the landlord equation. Now the interest deductibility is coming back, but I don't think landlords are going to jump back into older homes.
You don't, eh?
No. They're certainly the ones I'm talking to. They're looking ahead and going, the government will change again one day. What's the new government going to do? Remove deductibility. So just stay out of it. Don't buy old houses, okay? And we're seeing that in the price. The older houses the gap to new seems to be bigger than normal because the new houses have had all this new regulation loaded on. Aluminium joinery, you now need to put a thermal break in it. You've added 30% to the cost of windows in one hit, right? And you just keep loading all this regulation onto the new houses and the older ones are sitting there. So it's a great opportunity for first home buyers to snap up older homes. They should be out there buying old homes, right? With a bit of land, old house. Too bad if your kitchen's horrible, your bathroom's horrible, whatever. Do it over time. Like in the old days. That's what people used to do, right? They'd buy a rundown old thing and do it up on the weekends or, do it up when you've got the money to do it up.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we are going back in a way to how things used to work. Equilibrium, we're going to get there again.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, right? I think interest rates will come back down so that the ratio between making a decision to rent versus buying won't be so far as it is right now.
Yep.
People will probably just need to see the reality though, right? Like they'll need to see it before they believe it.
Well, you can't pay your mortgage with rates that are going to come down.
Exactly. And especially if you overlay any anxiety around potentially losing your job because of the recession, which is the reason why rates have to come down.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's like anything, right? Like when you're sick, if you've ever had the flu and you try to imagine just going for a run or playing with the kids or whatever, yeah, you just can't imagine that you will ever do it again. But the sun always comes out, that it's a new day. Things actually get better. Like it's spring right now, and it's hard to imagine it, but there will be people thinking a lot more optimistically again. And when they do, you're going to be there, hopefully, waiting to sell your property then. Correct. Or you're going to be hopefully getting ready to buy now, even though it doesn't feel yet like it's a good time to buy.
Well, I'm buying now because the consenting process takes so long.
Sure.
I want to have it consented. I want to have my artist impressions. I want everything ready to go. And then probably the next one, 10 units in Cambridge, I'll probably release in February next year.
Sure.
And then I'll have others lined up after that. But I'm buying now. I've already got a lot of land now, and I've got properties with consent, but I just want to keep adding to it because I don't like buying when there's a
market's
whole lot
off.
of competition.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And right now you're not getting the competition like you used to, which is cool, right? Like that's how you
It's
do it.
great.
Man, we could talk probably seriously. Hey, we could probably talk for another 2 or 3 hours, John. This is good. Awesome. Okay, so we've talked about the property development course, property development club. Sorry, propertydevelopmentclub.com.
Yes.
That's where people can go if they want to sign up. Sounds amazing. I encourage people to check it out. Also on YouTube, the name of the podcast that people can go to if they just want to, get some free stuff to start with.
Sure. Just put in my name, John Kenel. I think it's is it?
Yeah.
I know Instagram's at john.kennel. I think YouTube's the same, john.kennel. Just my name.
Okay. All right. Check it out. Connect with you on LinkedIn. You always put out some insightful posts. Love it. Awesome. Thanks, John.
Thanks very much.